Alright, so we have seen how to create a page. Now let us understand what do we have on the page. A page definition consists of two primary elements. So in Visualforce, any page will have two primary elements. What are those elements? One is markup. Okay, so markup is what? It's what you see on the page. Fine, that's markup. The markup defines the user interface component. So markup basically defines your UI components, anything which can be seen on the page, that should be included on the page and the way they should appear. Okay, so the markup defines the user interface components that should be included on the page and the way they should appear. So what all things should be there on the page and their appearances. So that is what markup defines. So for an example, a text, table of data, button, link, image, these are all markups. Okay, so whatever, small caption, heading, small block of text, everything is a markup. Then what else do we have on a Visualforce page? For a Visualforce page we have controllers. So there are two components or two elements of a Visualforce page. First one is markup, second one is controllers. So what is a controller thing? Set of instructions that specify what happens when a user interacts with the components specified in associated Visualforce markup. So controller is basically the set of instructions which you don't see on the page, but that set of instructions specify what will happen when a user interacts with the page. Let's say what happens when you open the page, what happens when you click on the page, what happens when you refresh the page, that sort of things, right? So that set of instruction is controller. So markup is something which is visible clearly on the screen, and controller is what is there in the backend. Clear on that? So this Visualforce controller controls actions such as when a user clicks a button or a link. Okay. Controllers also provide access to the data that should be displayed in a page. So what data should be displayed on the page? As I told you, what happens when you open the page? What all data gets loaded? That is also controlled by the controller. Correct? So any Visualforce page will have some markups and a controller. Controller will have the set of logics or the instructions, what needs to be done when someone clicks on the button, what needs to be done at any other action. So that is what a controller would do. Clear? Okay. So now markups is pretty simple. Markup, you can put anything. So let's understand a little more about controller. Okay. So there are four different types of controllers which we have. The first one is a standard controller. So controllers are of different types. First type of controller is a standard controller. What is the standard controller? A standard controller consists of the same functionality and logic that is used for a standard Salesforce page. Okay. So a standard controller consists of the same functionalities and logics that is used for a standard Salesforce page. Correct? So to understand this thing, refer to the page layouts and the standard pages of Salesforce. Salesforce by default has certain standard pages, right? So when they have pages, the standard pages, they must be having controllers for those pages also, right? So those controllers are called standard controllers. Alright. So if you want to include the same set of instructions on your Visualforce page, then you can use a standard controller. So for standard controller, you don't have to create a controller, you don't have to define the instructions. Correct? So that standard controller is already there. You just have to call it. So all the objects that we have in Salesforce, every object has a standard controller. We just have to call that standard controller. We don't have to create that because it's already there. Alright, so that is what standard controller does. The simplest of all controllers, easy to use. You just have to call the controller and it will call us existing controller. Standard list controller, the only difference between these two is standard controller is for one single record and standard list controller is for a list of records. So when you want to create a page to display list, you need a standard list controller. If you want to create a page to display a single record, you will use a standard controller. So that is the difference here. Alright, so two types of controllers. So in both these cases, you don't have to go and define the instructions. You will just call an existing controller from the Salesforce and that is it. There is a third type of controller which is called a custom controller. What is custom controller? A custom controller is a class written in Apex. So this custom controller is where you will provide the instructions. So that set of instructions which we are talking about, that will be supplied from our side. So we will go and write the instructions. How will we write the instructions? Using Apex. So Apex is another programming language. That is what I told you the other day. So we are going to use Apex to write this controller. Okay. So a custom controller is a class written in Apex that implements all of a page's logic without leveraging a standard controller. So this custom controller is this class which we write using Apex, and it does not leverage the standard controller. It will not use the standard controller instructions. It will use instructions which are defined by us. Okay. So if you are not willing to use the standard logics, you want to have your own logics, then you can use your custom controllers. Alright. If you want to have your own logics, own actions, you want to create buttons that should perform actions based on your requirements, then you should go ahead and use a custom controller, right? See, if you use a custom controller, you can define new navigation elements or behaviors. So if you are using a custom controller, then you can define new navigation elements like buttons and all, and you can define different new behaviors to them, whatever you want, right? Controller extensions. Now, a controller extension is a class written in Apex that adds to or overrides behavior in a standard or custom controller. So what is this controller extension? This is also a class. So this controller extension is also a class, but it is not used as a primary controller for the page. It is always used as an extension. So for example, you already have a controller of the page and you want to extend some functionalities of the page. Then you can use a controller extension as an add-on controller, right? So it does not act as a primary controller. You need to have a primary controller, either a standard one or a custom one. And to add certain functionalities, you can just quickly add a controller extension. The way we have profile and permission sets, profile has to be there for a user, right? But to give certain additional permissions, we give a permission set also. So same way, any page either has to have a standard or a custom controller, but on that controller, if you want to add a few more logics or small set of instructions, then you can use a controller extension. Alright, so now we have understood two elements of Visualforce page, markup and controllers, and we have understood four types of controllers, right? Now let's understand this thing, adding components to Visualforce page. Now what is a component? The other day I told you, what is a component? Anyone? Any quick responses?
As control object dashboards and those things? Those.
No. So components are the Visualforce page components. Whenever we are creating page, whatever we put in the page is a component, right? So all these Visualforce tags are called components. Fine. So I'll again talk about it. So let's understand this thing. Once you've created your Visualforce page, you will typically want to use additional components that supply a lot more functionality. So you will add components into the page to add functionalities. A component can be a button, it can be a form, it can be a small block, that sort of thing. Now Visualforce comes, okay, now you might be thinking, where do I get components? So Visualforce comes with a few dozen built-in components. So there are a lot of built-in components already there which you just have to use, right? And you build your own components to extend this set. So you can use the components which have been provided by Visualforce or the Salesforce.com. In addition to those, you can always create your own components as well. Click the component reference link in the page editor. A help pop-up window will display and with all available components. Okay, so component is that. Let's just go and see a small example of a component, and I will come back to the standard controller again. So the other day we created a page here, I guess it was Apex, this. Okay, so these all Visualforce components, what we call, they are these tags like this Apex page. This is a component. Okay, all the Visualforce components start with Apex colon. Okay, you have a page. Now there is another component called page block. You put a hello between this. See, there is a page block created, small rectangle. So this is another component. So page is a component, page block is a component. This way there is a form component, table component, button, link, input box, output box, text box, input text. A lot of components are there, right? So the moment I start typing here, if you type Apex colon, you will see a big list of components. So these are all the built-in components which are there in Salesforce, right? Don't worry, you don't have to go through everything, but it's again like this tags that we have in HTML. So we don't need to know all the tags, we just need to understand the concepts, that's it. So when required, you can use any of the tags or components. So here in Visualforce, we refer to them as components. Alright. Okay. So Salesforce allows you to use these components which are already there, and in addition to these components, you can always go and create your own component. So creating a component is a little complex, but you can always use the standard components. So as of now, we will just focus on using the components which have been provided by Salesforce. Alright. Okay. So now we will bring in the controller on this page. So we'll start with the standard controller. There are 4 types of controllers that we just talked about. We'll start with the standard controller. So let's understand standard controller a little better. So we already talked about it. A Visualforce controller is a set of instructions that specify what happens when a user interacts with the component specified in associated Visualforce markup, right? So when the user interacts with these components, what happens? That is what a controller controls. And for standard controller, I told you that these are already built-in set of actions, right? For every object we have. So a standard controller exists for every Salesforce object in Salesforce. So for all the Salesforce object, we have standard controller associated to them. Okay. So for them, we just need to call the standard controllers. We don't have to go and create or define any instructions. Let me make it even more simpler for you. Let's say you have created this page, okay? Now you want to connect this page with a backend object. You want to display account data on this page. For example, this is a page that you are designing to display account data. When you are designing a page, you must be designing it for some object, right? You will not create a Visualforce page for designing a website. You will create it to be the front end of the database, right? Because this is on Salesforce. In Salesforce, you have the data in the backend. So the front end page will showcase or display some data. Now, which object data you want to display on this page? Based on that, you will have to pick the standard controller. All right. Let's say this is the page which I want to connect with the account object. So I just need to go and define the standard controller as account, so that it gets the standard controller from account object. Correct? So that is the logic. There is one more thing, small thing before we get into the next step. We know now we know what are components, right? So this is a component. This is another component. Each component in Visualforce page has certain attributes. Okay, so just remember these two terminologies: components and attributes. So every component has certain attributes. For example, this page component, it has this long list of attributes. So let's say you don't want to, on this page you don't want to see this sidebar. Okay, so the sidebar is an attribute of the page. You can just go and say sidebar equals false. So in the same page component, what I have done, I have defined an attribute of the page component. If I save it now, the sidebar will be removed. If I don't want to see the header, there is this thing called show header. Do you see this? So this is the thing. This is how this entire thing works. So we have these different attributes for every component. For page block, there are different attributes like title. Save it. See? So every component has certain attributes. Alright? Let me remove the attributes now. So you can define the component without attributes as well. If you want, you can control the appearance of the component using the attributes. Fine. The controller is an attribute of your page. Controller needs to be defined as an attribute of the page. Okay. So we will define the standard controller here. Standard controller account. That's it. Object name needs to be used here. That's it. So now this page has got the set of instructions from the account object. Now this page can display data from account object. Okay, and how do you bring data? To bring data, you just have to use this syntax. Within curly brackets, object name dot field name. Curly brackets, exclamation, object name dot field name. That is what it is. Do you see some account name appearing here? No, right? Let me delete this. So ideally this should show me the name of an account, right? It should fetch some data. That is the syntax which we have put. We want to see name of an account, account.name. Do we see some data appearing here on the page? No. Why don't we see the data here? The reason is that there are a lot of accounts in this object, maybe 15, 20. I have just given space for one account name. Now the Salesforce is not able to understand which account name I want to display here. See, I have not created a list kind of a thing or a table where it can display multiple records. I just specified or provided space for one record. Now Salesforce does not understand how to so Salesforce does not understand how to display this data. There are so many records, how to display this entire thing in one place. So for that we have to define the reference of the record, which record we want to display on this page. Alright, how will we do that? You just have to take the ID of the record, then put it on the page. So pick ID of any record. I have opened this Burlington Textile Corp. Okay. Pick the ID of any record. Copy the ID from here in the URL. Okay. This is where you get the record ID. Any record, if you open on Salesforce, at the top you will get the record ID. Copy it and bring it to your Apex page URL. And after the page name, put a question mark ID equals. So these 4 characters you have to put and then paste the ID. That's it. So you have the Visualforce page name, put a question mark ID equals and then simply paste the ID of the record. That's it. Now press enter. Now do you see this company name? So this is how you use a standard controller. You define the object here, which object you want to connect to for this page. You define the URL ID here of the record. Now whichever ID, from whichever record you take the ID, it will take the data from that page, from that record. Let's say United Oil and Gas, take the ID. See, that shows United Oil and Gas, right? So this page is a generic kind of a page that we have created. Depending on what ID comes here, it will show you the data on the page. Alright, so this page is more like a template. Depending on the ID which is provided in the URL, it will display the data. Clear? Anyone has any question here so far? So creating a page, defining a standard controller for it, writing the code for displaying data of the object and supplying the ID of the record. So far we are clear on everything. It's very simple. So there is nothing you have to do. You just have to go and in the page component you have to define standard controller, and then standard controller should be the name of the object, which object you want to connect it with. Then just write what data you want to display on the page and supply the ID in the URL. That's it.
Jeet, is there any document or material that we can refer to the syntaxes of the Apex?
Syntax of Apex or Visualforce?
Yeah, like a Visualforce.
Syntax of Visualforce. There is a big there is a document. Yeah, I will share that document with you guys. But the point is that the document is huge, and you might not be that patient to read. You might require to read 80 pages to write these 3 lines. So still, if you want to go back and refer to that, that's fine. Otherwise, use these syntaxes. So is there a challenge here in the syntaxes that we are discussing?
No, nothing about that. Like suppose we are familiar with these type of syntax now, but in our work maybe sometimes more.
Yeah,
might have
for that
another
reference,
syntax.
yeah, that's exactly. Okay, syntax means you are talking about the components, right?
Yeah, components, like what is the
Okay,
exact,
not
suppose you
okay.
said we have to use flower brackets and put the exclamatory mark and then the object and then the name.
See, okay, fine. I'll tell you. There are 2 things. One is the syntax. Syntax, though, you will be, pretty familiar with, because you will keep on writing it. Now, this first time you're seeing it, that is the reason why. The moment you create one page, and this is, everywhere, wherever you have to bring in a field value in Salesforce, this is the common syntax. If you guys remember email template also, merge field, this was the syntax there. So this is something which you will get very familiar with. So this is not a challenge. Yeah. What you would need to refer is these components. So what all components are there, what all attributes are there and all. So that is something you will need. So I will give you a reference library for that one also, from where you can refer to components when you are working on practical things and all. So there is a big nice book that you can refer to anytime. But initially don't go to that book, because that will confuse you more than helping. All right. So
Yeah.
now this is how we will create the page. Now here, if you want to display some other data of this record, let's say, let's put a line break and say account dot type. So this should be the object name dot field name. So you need to make sure what is your field name. Right, when you save it, it throws an error. Can you just read the error and see what is wrong? Who can tell me what went wrong here?
Fax number. Hello? Fax
Yeah.
account dot fax number. Yeah.
Why? How did you think that it's talking about account.fax number? Why do you
For that,
think?
From the column number.
brackets are not there. Brackets are not there.
No, so that is one assumption, but how do you read the error and find out? From
the
error, how do you get the hint?
Page 1, line 5, column 7.
Right, so
There is a
it's
written-
talking about line 5 here. Sometimes
Line
the
five,
error
yeah.
is not clearly mentioned, but still it gives you some hint so that you can go quickly and check it. Okay. So now this brackets or the syntax was not correct here. Fine. Now still it gives an error. What is the error now?
Fax number.
So what do you think might be the reason? The fax number is the issue, but what is the issue with that?
Maybe in accounts we have written only fax. We have not written fax number. At the
Yeah,
time of
so-
creating fax object.
Yeah, so that fax is not an object, fax is a field. That is what we have to understand.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Field, yeah.
So now how will I check? This is fax, so you are just guessing it. That's fine, fax or fax number. But how will I get to know it? From where will you get it? It can be any object, right? So how will you get to know whether it is fax or is it fax underscore number or is it fax underscore n? I mean, there can be anything. Right? So how do I get to know this? Just because this is fax, it's easy for us to understand, right? But the field can be anything. So we have to understand the field name. How will we understand the field name? You have been creating fields and all these things while designing the applications. Just need to go to setup, customize account fields. That's it. Go to customize accounts fields. So here you will get to see what are the field names. You have to use field name in the code, not the field label. Label is different, name is different. So what is the name for this fax field? Fax. So this is what I should be using there. Okay. Now if I want to display industry of the record as well, then it should be account dot, what is the name of the field? Industry. Now try and save it. This editor you can maximize or minimize it. You can make it a little smaller so that you can see the page, and then you can extend it so that you can write the code, right? So that option is there, or you can simply click on this button. Okay, so now it shows you details of this. United Oil and Gas, customer direct, this is a phone number, this is a fax number, this is energy industry. Okay, if you want to put labels, you just have to go ahead and put the labels from your side. Something like account name, let me make it bold. So I have put the labels for everything. So manually I'll just type things. Okay, so this should be closed. This is just the bold tag from our HTML. So that is it. So now it says name United. Type this phone fax industry. Got it? So this is how we actually use our standard controller. Okay. You bring in the controller, then you can write what data you want to show on that page. Okay. And then you supply the URL, supply the ID in the URL. That is it. That is what we do. Standard controller can be connected to one record at a time. I am able to supply one ID here, right? Which means I can just reference it to one record. So standard controller page is basically for one single record. Alright, if you want to display a complete list of records, then you either have to use a standard list controller or a custom controller. Standard controller has a restriction that it will deal with one single record at a time. Okay, and that is the reason why here we have to supply the ID of the record. So I can just supply one ID in the URL. It will always be connected to one record in the backend. Okay. So the object, which object you are connecting to goes in this line. Which record are you referring to goes here. Which fields data you want to show, that comes here. Is it easy? Is it difficult? Fine. Can you create one? Okay. So this is my page. Alright. So if on this page I need a section, small section here, I can create a page block. So page block actually allows me to have a small block and I can put my data here. So I can cut this entire thing and put it inside the block. Then what will happen? This entire data comes inside this block. See this? Then page block has an attribute called title. So you can just put account details. So this page block is a component. In case you want to break this block into smaller sections, you have another component called page block section. Effects page block section. So let's say in page block section you want to put general details, or call it general info, and in general info you want to put the name, type and industry. And one more page block section. Okay, so you see how we have formed this thing. We have firstly we have created a page component. Inside the page we have a page block component, and under the page block, this page block starts on line 2 and it ends on line 14. Within this page block we have created two sections, smaller sections. One starts at 3 and ends at 7, and the other one starts at 9 and ends at 12. So two page block sections I have inside this, right? Now if I save this thing, okay, I want to give them different titles. So for the second section I gave it a title, contact info. See, these page blocks and sections easily help you to create small blocks of the data. The way you want to do the the styling or the designing of the page. So these small components are easily available. Page block section is by default collapsible, which means you have an option to collapse the page block section. By default it's there. Okay. In case you don't want to make it collapsible, then you can change the attribute of the section. So in the page block section there is another attribute called collapsible. Make it false. Good thing about Visualforce is you don't have to write the entire thing. You just have to start. See, the moment you write CO, it gives you both the options. Now select. Now it gives you true false option. That's it. So writing Visualforce is the easiest thing in the world, simpler than HTML, because in HTML also, even if the tags are smaller, that one character, but you have to remember that one character. Here you don't have to do anything, you just have to start it and you can write it, right? And the components that they have provided, the inbuilt components that we were talking about, are so nice that they help you design a very nice professional looking page quickly. See, I have not done anything on the styling. If you guys actually work on HTML, you might understand how much work you have to do if you have to design similar kind of thing on HTML. Here I did not do anything. I am simply focusing on how to display the data. So this is the advantage of the platform. The styling and everything, for proper color, fonts and everything, it's taking automatically. I just don't need to focus on that. I just have to focus on how do I want to bring the data and how do I want to use the data on this page. Alright, so this is one. Now let me create another page. This is where I have used this thing. Let me create another page, page 2. Alright, so this is the other page that we have here. Now for this page I will use another component. There is a Salesforce component which is used for displaying all the data of a record. So the previous example we saw that how can we display one particular field, like name, type, industry. In case you want to display all the data from the page layout which is available to you, then you just have to use a small component, apex detail. let me write it like this. Page I have created, then I go ahead and create page block. Page block section, and inside the section I just use a small component called apex detail. This detail component displays details of all the details of the record, which record for which you have supplied the ID, the record which is in context. So let me take this ID here, put it here, question mark ID equals, yeah. Okay, the same error, I did not save it. Text page. So apex page is there, page block section is there, and inside the page block section I would display details of the record. So I'll just use the detail component, that's it. And here, okay, I will say show the name of the account. Alright, so now let's see what this detail component brings. Rest is page block and page block section. Detail brings all the details of the record. Fine, so in case you want to display complete details of the record, you should use a detail component. So only using one component will bring all the details of the record. Which record? The one which is in context, the one for which you have supplied the ID. Alright. Now do you notice one thing, that all this data that has come in one side of the page. It's not appearing here in the right hand side. There is nothing here. The reason for that is this is inside a page block section, right? A page block section by default has two columns. Okay. That is the reason why all the data that I have put has got into the first column and the second column is blank. What we have to do here, we have to make it a single column thing. Columns equals 1. That is it. Right, so page block section, you can have multiple columns there, but because you just have one component inside that which cannot be broken into columns, so that is the reason why I've made it one column, so that one single column occupies all the space. Now this is better, right? Clear on this? Okay. Now the next thing that we have to do here is we can see related list. Okay, what is a related list? The related list is the list of child records. So these are all related list on the account. Contacts, the list of contacts which appears here, list of opportunities. So when you show the detail of a page, when you use a detail component, it also shows related list. This related list is there in the standard page also, no? If you just go here and see, related list appears, right? So detail comes from this standard page. Okay, that is the reason why it shows the related list. In case you don't want to see the related list on the Visualforce page, you should go ahead and define that in the detail component. In the detail component, you need to go and define related list equals false. So this attribute needs to be defined. Once you do this, then your related list will not be here. See, now it only shows the details of the record. Alright. Now if I want to have another other sections, for example, the first section I am displaying details. You want to have other section here, apex page block section, and in the second section you want to display the contacts, only contacts. So contacts is what? A related list. So for displaying one related list, you have to use a component called related list and give the name of the list, which is contacts. That's it. You see this one? This is what we have. So we have created a page block section to display the related list. Now who can tell me why I just see the related list only in half of this space? Why not here? Why is it not spread?
Again, column section.
Yes.
This one section.
Yeah, so page block section has two columns by default. I have to make it one column. Fine. Now if I don't want to see the sidebar on this page, sidebar is an attribute of the page component. So go to apex page, say sidebar equals false. So this is where you define sidebar equals false. So sidebar will be removed. One more related list, apex related list. Before related list, let me put a column section, page block section. Okay, so now for this one, in the second section I will make it opportunities and cases. All right. So see, one section I just had one column and that is all contacts. In this one I have tried to show you an example where you can use two columns, right? So you can, if you want, you can use two columns also if you want to display two lists or two components parallelly, right? So the first component that you use goes into the first column, the second component goes into the second column. So inside this page block section, I have a related list of opportunities. It comes to the first column and it goes to the second column. You could have increased the number of columns as well, but it's fine. I think we just needed two. So by default there are two, and this way. So this is also a way of using it. Fine. So these components can be used for displaying the data in this way and all. So this is one more code. Now we have understood how to use different components on the Visualforce and how to display the data and all, right? Now the next thing that we are going to talk about is how to use standard list controller. So this is all standard controller. See, here we are referring to one record at a time. Fine. Always standard controller will always require an ID in the URL, and we have to kind of supply the ID in the URL for the standard controller. So it can be created for one record. So this Visualforce pages using standard controller can be created for one record. So whenever you see that there is a requirement where you have to create a Visualforce page for a single record, then use standard controller. Alright. If you want to display a complete list of records, then you will have to use standard list controller. Okay. So the next example that we will do is of a standard list controller. Chetan, can you please mute your microphone? Okay. So the next thing is a standard list controller. So standard list controller is not different from a standard controller. It's almost same. Okay. The only difference between a standard and a standard list controller is, try and understand this very clearly. In standard controller, you need to supply the ID of a record and the page can display only one record. In standard list controller, you don't have to supply any of these things. Okay, and the page will display the entire list of records from that object. So let me create a page, a third page for standard list controller. Click on create page. For a standard list controller, there are two things you have to do. First, you have to define a standard controller, as we do, and then we have to define a record set variable. So we have to define a variable for the list of records. So you can give it any name. Record set var, you can give it any name, whatever you want. Alright. Now here what we have to do, we will go ahead and create a page block. Because here we are talking about a list of record. Here we are not talking about single record. So for displaying the list of record, we use a table. So there is this component called apex page block table. In that component, you will just have to define two attributes. For a page block table component, there are two attributes which are required. One is value. So what data you want to display in the table? I want to display this, because this is the variable used for defining the set of records from this object, right? So you just have to go and say this, that this is what I want to display inside the table. And there is another variable that you have to define here, which will stand for this. For instead of this big expression, you can define a small variable here, a. It could be anything, right? Now, this is a variable which you can use inside the page instead of this big expression. So instead of using this long thing every time, you can simply use this. Alright? So it's just a variable. Now inside this table, we will create columns. So here I will not have one name, I will have a list of names. So I'll need to define a column for that. Call it apex column and say value. Column value is a dot name. So this a means what? This. And this is what? This is the list of records. So this column will contain name of all the accounts. Similarly, you can have name, type, industry, phone, fax. See, so in a standard list controller page, you did not have to supply the ID. It has by default taken the complete list. Just that you have to form a table and define the data in columns. So earlier we were talking about one value. Now we are talking about a complete list. So we will define those in columns. So two components that we have used here is one is apex page block table and the other is column inside the page block table. Correct? So page block table has these two attributes which you have to define. One is value, what value you want to display in the table, and the second thing is variable. So variable just stands for this expression. So instead of using this long expression every time, I just said a dot name, a dot type, a dot industry. So that is what it displays. Got this? Please tell me if you are clear on this part. Right, so that is about our standard list controller. Now there's just one small thing that we will discuss before we conclude our today's session. In case you want one of these fields to be editable, let's say industry, you want this to be editable. Fine. Instead of, while you're displaying the list, instead of this value appearing like this, you want this to be an editable field. You just have to do a small thing. You will have to put it inside an input field. So input field is a component which allows you to enter some value into that field, right? So we are talking about industry. So if you have to make it an input field, what you have to do, you just have to define it this way. See this. You have to start a column, apex column, and then you have to close the column. If you want to make it input field, you have to start and close, and between the start and close you have to put input field. Okay. So whenever you use an input field on Apex page, you always have to use a form component. Okay. So form component can come right after the Apex page component. So this is a must. A form component needs to be there to bring in any input or button kind of thing on your page. In the input field, you go and give the value a dot industry. See, if you want, you can edit the or input the industry here. Clear? Have we got an input component here? So this is how you can actually design your standard list controller page. The only difference between a standard controller and a standard list controller is that because it is dealing with the list, you have to define a variable record set var in the Apex page component itself as an attribute, and that will be, and that is something which will be called on the page block table. Alright, and then the moment I wanted to use input field, this is how I used it. And if you are using any such component where the user can interact with the page, like an input field or a button or something, these kind of components always need to be within an Apex form component. So that Apex form component I have just put here. So that is it.